These are two important women, Louise Da-Cocodia and Eloise Edwards. They were very active in their communities in a number of different roles. And I was fortunate to be able to be around and to be relating to the other initiatives that they were involved in. And we were together at karaoke when Louise was chairperson for many years. And then as she stepped down, I was appointed, while I was company secretary when she was chairperson. And when she stepped down as chairperson, I became chairperson of Karaoke Enterprises. So that worked well. The fact that, because sometimes strong personalities can sort of clash and not necessarily get on well together. But I felt that we were a threesome, a very important threesome, three strong black women, and that we were able to work together and cooperate. There's always disagreements within small groups, you know, thinking about how you prioritize, what is more important, what you should do first, and so on. But we were able to overcome those challenges. And we worked together very well, I think, to great effect.
Gun crime wasn't a part of my life. I heard about it on the TV, you read about it in the papers. And if I'm going to be honest, when I saw it on the TV and read about it in the papers, I felt and I thought, well, you know what, it happens to them or those kind of people because they're involved in it. And when it actually happened to me right at my feet, you know, it just changed my life. That day changed my life. Because there was a lot of people, just very quickly I'll tell you, we were in a house party where there was a lot of people that saw what happened. But when the police turned up, I mean, everybody turned deaf, dumb and blind. And that's when I realized that the wall of silence is actually real. It does exist, because the walls went up, the silence came down, nobody would speak. And we were told by our own peers that, well, we don't speak to the police around here. People don't speak to the police. And I was like, yeah, but you know what, my mate's just been shot and I'm speaking. And there was lots of things about that night. I mean, I made the 999 call to the police and the ambulance, but it actually took them almost 50 minutes to arrive. And we were about 5 minutes from the hospital. If I was able, I would have picked him up, put him in my car and got him there a lot quicker. And we were told from senior police officers that, well, it takes 45 minutes because, well, it is a bit of a no-go area, that part of Moss Side. We were told by local councillor that, well, it's true. It's a bit of a no-go area. And I mean, to tell the truth, I was absolutely flabbergasted because I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute. I live there. So does that mean if I make a 999 call, nobody's coming? I thought, no wonder the place was like how it was. And the fact that people were not speaking to police, that got me. The fact that we were told it's a no-go area, that got me. The fact that my children were threatened on the way to school at gunpoint to warn their mum to stop speaking to the media and stop speaking to the police, that got me and my husband. The fact that people let off gunshots outside our house, you know, at night, not once, not twice, to warn us again to stop speaking to the media and stop speaking to the police. You know, that's when I thought, you know what, if somebody feels they have to do something to me in particular because I'm speaking the truth, then so be it. But that's not going to silence me because my mate got shot 12 times and I'm not going to see a good friend of mine get shot and I turn my back and do nothing. I thought that's why the place is the way it is, because good people decide to do nothing, and I see myself as a good person, but I was not going to decide to do nothing. I decided that I'm going to do something about this. And whoever was with me, they're with me. And it worked out that there were other people that felt the same, but probably just too afraid to speak up. And it was very challenging. You know, it was very challenging. Sometimes going down to Home Office and I'll be the only female, the only black female, the only person from Moss Side. And, you know, you're sat in a room with about 12 or 15 white middle-class men. That is challenging because, you know, I have been told once when I was at one of those meetings that, oh, you know, you're only here as a token. And I thought to myself, you know what? And I admit, I agreed with her. I said, but you know what? I've got an agenda as well. And I'd laid my rules down on the table.
Activism. For me, if there's a need, as I say, I believe in walking the walk. because years ago I actually managed the Women's Refuge for African Caribbean women, Sojourner's House. I was the coordinator for 2 years, and I found a lot of the women, especially if I was on a night shift or late shift, they would come and they'd start talking to me, and a few of them actually said, you know, we can really talk to you, we can tell you about anything and you listen. And I started thinking, maybe I need to get a qualification or something in counselling and do this properly. So after I left there and took up fostering, I decided I needed to do something. So I decided to train to become a counsellor. And I've worked at different organisations in the community, and I actually teach next door to this centre. There's a programme next to Manchester Counselling Training Centre, and I teach one evening a week. I train other people who want to become counsellors, because I think a lot of people don't realise, you know, a counsellor, you know, no matter how hard they try, you know, if you have somebody, you know, we call it UPR, unconditional positive regard, and you can have unconditional positive regard for somebody, you can have empathy. But if you've come from that culture, you know, your ancestors were slaves, there are certain things that you will just understand naturally that somebody else, no matter how hard they try, might not. And this is what I feel, you know, there's a need for more African Caribbean, Asian cultures, counsellors, female counsellors, male counsellors. So if somebody goes in, you know, I want an Indian male counsellor, that person's available. I want a Nigerian female counsellor, that person is available to meet your needs and be on the same level. So that's another part of my achievements, trying to do something for my community in my little way.
Working at NACRO opened my eyes to the levels of self-harm within women, and also in terms of the 24-hour cover house that I would work in, because there were a range of properties that I worked across. What became very apparent to me was that a lot of women in contact with the system, with the criminal justice system, had experienced abuse in some way. Abuse involving coercion, manipulation, you know, from primarily different men in their lives, be it relatives, partners. So also, it was almost like a revolving door for some women. You know, they'd consistently, here we are trying to provide a system that rehabilitates, you know, gets people in contact with education and training, but actually reflecting on it, you think, what are we doing about the core, about the main issue that is almost creating whatever it is that's ending up with them being in contact with the criminal justice system. You know, what are people trying to block out when they're using drugs? What is it that, you know, it's those sorts of things that needed to be addressed, because it's almost like a sticking plaster, isn't it, without looking at actually what's causing that wound in the first place.
We recently started a women's group, Women of Worth, which kind of like looks at empowering women, even though that group kind of like represents women who have been through domestic violence, domestic abuse, but we don't want to focus on that. It's more focused on now how you empower these women to become independent and to make kind of informed choices for themselves and be able to sustain themselves, because a lot of them stay in these relationships because they can't financially look after themselves. And what we're discovering is that they've got skills, whether it be plaiting hair, baking cakes, you know, childminding, that they can use to make income so that they can become independent. I've met some absolutely fabulous women, and I did that sharing my own experience of domestic abuse, and it kind of like got 5,500 hits on Facebook alone, and I got women from across the globe getting in contact, either just to say well done, or I'm going through that, or I've been through that, you know. So it just kind of showed me that this was kind of needed, and my focus then moved from education of young black males, which is where I always kind of felt my kind of niche was, into the empowerment of women.
The Women's Action Forum was set up in 1994, and our aim was to empower women and enable them back into employment and education. So a lady called Judy Craven. I don't know if you know, she worked extensively with the Manchester Education, and she developed a program that enabled women to go back to university or into employment. Many of them who had been off bringing up children, being single parents, and those were the sort of things we did as the Women's Action Forum, and challenging society and the establishment to give women equal opportunities. Obviously with Mrs. Da-Cocodia at the head of the organisation as a chair, because when it was established, she was the first chair. But we were successful because as women who've struggled on their own to bring up children and sometimes get a career going whilst your children are at school, going to university, having to do essays, housework, bringing up your children and all that, it's not an easy task. So, you know, we experienced it, most of us, and we were able to pass this on to empower other women from the community.
I feel very strongly about this, and I suppose it will always be a challenge, but it's always something that's going to enable me to keep going and to keep growing, and that is education. I really, educationally wise, I'm definitely up for lifelong learning in all aspects of life. One of the projects that I remember being involved, it was left for me it was just a proposal on a piece of paper. It was left by my predecessor, Lorraine Questel, and that was women into construction. I remember when I picked up the proposal, I thought, right, okay. But I thought, you know what? It's about pushing back the boundaries. Yes, we can do it. Women can do it. You know, you speak to many women in the community. A lot of them decorate their own homes. I mean, my mum was one of them. I remember that vividly. That my mum didn't wait on my dad to decorate the house. And we all had to do our bit, but the decorating was done. And I thought, I'm gonna run with this project. And I can remember going down to Mancat, which is now called the Manchester College, and sitting down with the construction team there. And they basically, it's like as if they just practically wanted to laugh me out of the meeting, because they just thought, women construction. Anyway, to cut a long story short, women into construction did happen. I thought, well, if I've got anything to do with this, it's going to happen. So women into construction happened, and we went from, it was the way we designed the course, went from no skill to NVQ3, and the women were skilled up. Yeah, the women were skilled up in things like plastering, plumbing, carpentry. There were 6 different elements. Escapes me all the 6, but they went from no skill to some of them even got jobs out of it. Some of them went off and veered off to develop their own business, because entrepreneurship was something as well that we covered in the organisation. So yeah, and from what I understand, I mean, the last time I spoke, had a word, and it was probably maybe about 2-3 years ago, Women into Construction is still going on as part of that course. So at the same place where they didn't think it was possible in the first place. So yeah, definitely.
Women actually make up over 70% of the union, branch-wise and nationally as well. So that's a good thing. That is a very good thing. What I'm trying to do is to encourage more black people and more black women to join the union, but not only to join it, but to be active within it, because you never know when you need protection. But within the union, there are so many training opportunities and opportunities for development, you know, and it's sort of an assurance that you won't be disadvantaged. We do have recruitment drives, and also at a regional level, I'm on a project board that is looking at how we can develop more, if you like, hard to reach people. So it's not that it's forgotten about, but there's a whole programme of things that are in place at the moment. I've organised various community events. The most recent one was in Manchester, with the International Men's Day, which was on the 19th of November of this year. Now, I did that particularly because the International Men's Day is not as well known as the Women's Day. And I think we have to basically big up our men more than we actually do. So that was about being positive, recognising the achievements and contributions that men make, particularly to family and community.
When I worked in the Manchester City Council, I was elected as the Vice Chair for the Black Officers Association. And part of that was because, you know, the council recognised there was injustices, unfair treatment, discrimination in the council. So part of our role was to work towards helping our co-workers have a voice in terms of some of the changes that needed to happen. And I suppose looking at achievements, one of them was, I remember being the first black woman to speak at the first all black officers conference in the City Council. It's never been done before. That was part of something we initiated. We wanted to see us all together in one room talking about our issues with those people in positions of power. So that was a nerve-wracking time for me, but it was really empowering. It was empowering for others because part of what my responsibility there was to show that we can move forward, we can achieve, even with the barriers. It was very much rather than a position of not having power, it was a position of look what we have and what we can do if we work towards it. But what it does is it sets a catalyst and a precedent for people to know these are just things that we should be doing anyway. Yes, it would look good for anybody to do anything on the first level of any kind, but I think it was a historical moment in a sense because the City Council, I believe, were really impacted by the amount of greatness in the room, and that we'd all turned up and we all felt, you know, it was something that we should be doing. As far as I know, it wasn't something that continued, but I know that, you know, it was something that we would have liked to have kept going.
I joined the Manchester Black Women's Cooperative as an employee, and that marked the beginning of my community activism. Because being at the Manchester Black Women's Cooperative, I also became involved with the Amilcar Cabral Saturday Supplementary School. And it was named Amilcar Cabral after the leader of the Guinea-Bissau. He was the leader of Guinea-Bissau and the struggle. And furthermore, we like the motto about the children are the flowers of our struggle and the principal reason for a fight. So it was a way of motivating us. So whatever we're doing in the community, we're not just doing it for ourselves, we're doing it for our children. So that really was about promoting black culture within the curriculum. So that was happening alongside the Manchester Black Women's Cooperative. But the Manchester Black Women's Cooperative kind of came to an end because after a while, people grow and they develop. And even though it was called the Manchester Black Women's Cooperative, it was really, in a sense, led by the voice of the more experienced men, as in Ron Phillips. And so we wanted a greater voice, wanted women's voice to be much stronger. And so in the end, we decided to go our separate ways. And out of that came Abycinda Cooperative. And Abycinda Cooperative, which became, it's an organization for women, led by women, but for the community. And in so doing, we were able to, the voices of women became more prominent than as was evident in the Black Women's Cooperative.
I think Abycinda specifically worked very well because there was really no sort of judgment about what people did or didn't do. So some women would work really hard and you know, there are unsung women in that group who did probably mostly hard work, fundraising, for instance. But people came in and out of it and contributed what they could, when they could. But it was also a social support group. So we would meet Friday nights, smoke, drink, clear our week in terms of, you know, what had been happening to us, you know. And other, you know, obviously other women were able to come in and do that as well, whether they saw themselves as a member of that group or not. I was quite political. I would always say I was a socialist.
So I've always had that view of myself, and a feminist. Those two were very strong tendencies for me. So I wanted to work with other women on a range of issues, everything from abortion, LGBT rights, domestic violence. Those were serious issues for women. For black women, there were other specific sorts of issues. So in terms of abortion, it wasn't so much of an issue. Getting an abortion for a black woman wasn't that difficult because there was a state control almost of, black women's fertility. So some women were being sterilised, and some black women were being sterilised. They would go in for what they thought was one treatment and end up being sterilised. So that was a serious difference for us. We're saying like, okay, yeah, abortion is important to have that right to control your own fertility, but we've got this other bit which is like somebody's imposing something on us completely differently.
When Hartley was a youth worker, he used to visit Prestwich Hospital, and he realised that a lot of young men who were missing from the area, they were actually in Prestwich. And he came back, had a discussion with the group. I think they were called Shell at one time, and discussed the fact that these people needed support whilst they're in hospitals. And they decided that they'd set up an organisation, and they used to go into the hospitals, visit people who were African and Caribbean young men mostly in them days, and they were over-medicated most of the time, because there's a saying that when you're black, it's big, black and dangerous, so they over-medicated them. And the organisation initially was a campaigning organisation as well. And they would have discussions with the NHS, the local authorities, etc., to sort of educate them about being black and African Caribbean people. So even today, we are helping the medical profession or all the other practitioners and all other organisations to understand our culture better, so that they can treat people who need that help in a more culturally appropriate way.
I became involved with the Association of Black Psychologists, which is based in the USA, in about 2010, and was going to their conferences, and I thought to myself, I want to really put African psychology on the map in the UK and add to the work that other people have done, trying to get the message out there to say that Eurocentric psychology, it works for some black people, but for other black people, it isn't meeting their needs. We need a therapy that's developed by us, for us, that's meeting our needs. So in 2016, I developed Nubia Wellness and Healing, and I've done presentations, conferences, workshops on getting people more knowledgeable in our community about African psychology and African-centred therapies. So one of my challenges has been that it's about, you've got double the work sometimes to do, because it's about how do I find a psychology that makes sense to me and the lived experiences that I go through and the lived experiences that people like me go through. It isn't just about helping people to feel better about their situation. It was a situation that they shouldn't be in the first place, because it's not sometimes that individuals are sick, it's that the communities are doing things that make individuals sick. The system of white supremacy can sometimes mean that people can experience tremendous amounts of pressure and become de-spirited. And sometimes we need to do things to help people build resilience. And that's one of the things that the emotional emancipation circles do. It helps people build resilience so that when they go out there into life and they get hit by things, they can bounce off easier.
When I had been in Kingston, I had been, after university, part of a group that ran literacy and numeracy classes in a secondary school in the evenings. And we were very influenced by this educationalist called Freire. And his whole thing was, if you're going to teach people anything, you have to begin with the symbols out of their world and their experience. And it just affected the whole way I worked. And that's how we came to do what I consider one of my biggest achievements, which is a teaching pack all about what Caribbean Creole was like, how it was a proper language with a grammar, and how you could learn to write and read in standard English, even if you had been brought up speaking and listening to a Caribbean Creole. And we produced a teaching pack from that. And it was interesting because when we produced that pack, several young black people who had been born in Manchester said, okay, well, where's our story? And we set off again with a new group. And this group were younger, born in the area, had experience being black British as opposed to Caribbean living in Britain. And we produced another book, which we called Triangular Minds. And this was because they felt their experience was the result of Africa to the Caribbean, to the Western world, mainly Bristol, Liverpool, those slave cities. And they felt that triangle had affected who they were and what their position was. And again, that was a huge learning experience for me. I had no idea. I had never experienced any of the things that those young people experienced. And so we wrote about their experiences from their own words. And again, it was a big revelation.
When I came into youth and community work, particularly at Abraham Moss, although there had been activities in relation to young people and young black people, there wasn't any input really in relation to their culture and the struggles that have been happening. So, and they really embrace that. And the way there were two major starting points for me was to get the young women at that time. There was quite a lot of stigma about women and children. So in order to break that stigma was to get them to come together. And we actually set up a group called Taliba, Women with Children, and it was Seeker After Knowledge. And within that group, we traveled, we had meetings, they learned photography, they learned to do through another link called Kabusha, like a business link, business cooperative. We actually did T-shirts, and that was one of the ones that we did for the Sickle Cell Center. We did one for Abasindi. We took them to see Abasindi project. And one of the major achievements at that time with the young women was to do the Size 8 magazine. And many of the articles in the magazine is to do with where they were coming from. For example, A Young Mother Speaks. Some of them talked about the difficulties that they were experiencing in school and the teachers, particularly in maths, what the teachers were doing. We came down to Abasindi, we interviewed Abasindi women and a whole range of different things. So that was really a really exciting time for the women.
When you have a child with a disability, you need to be involved in their education. You just do. It's the biggest part of, it's the biggest possibility for change and growth. We have an organisation called Autism for the Arts, and myself and Nadia, we go into cultural venues, Manchester Art Gallery, Manchester Museum, Whitworth Art Gallery, the Tate in Liverpool, any cultural venues or spaces that are free, and we teach and train all the staff in autism awareness. It's been a passion of mine because I have a son who is on the autistic spectrum, and so realising the challenges that we've had as a family has led me to do a lot of work around autism. So part of that work came about because as a mum, like other mothers, I was taking my children to the museums and the art galleries and not having a great response from the staff, I'll say that, based on my son's autism and the way his behaviour was within those venues. And since the experience I had with that, I contacted them and then we developed this organisation. They were willing to let us come in and guide them as to how they could change the way they are and the way they run their venues to make it more accessible for families who have got children with disabilities. I'm a governor at 2 schools, so a governor at the Birches and a governor at the Grange School, which is specifically for children with autism. It's, again, yeah, it means that I can find out what they're doing, feed it into the other work I do as well, the work with the museums, linking that to the schools. The schools have been working with Manchester Museum on a project, which is fantastic for children with autism to be able to feel the artefacts from the museum, really, really old, thousand-year-old artefacts, but feel them through a machine that's called a haptic machine that 3D prints the objects and then inserts them into this machine, and the children can actually feel. It's just amazing. So that's another thing that I like. In all of my work, I like it to link in. I like them all to link into each other. So, yeah, that's something I'm enjoying as well.
There was a problem with our young girls in the community because as at then, there was no sex education in schools. The problem was there, but nobody was talking about it. And when they go to college and sometimes drop out, become pregnant, parents don't want to know. The boy is not responsible enough, who has pregnated the girl, to accept that responsibility. The girl is left in limbo. And they go to the health center, sit down there when they go for clinical checkup, and sometimes they refuse to go home, especially when they've had a baby. These girls have a problem. They have nowhere to go. They have nobody to encourage them. They have, if becoming pregnant was a mistake then, they have made a mistake. But must it be something they have to suffer all their life? So she decided we should set up a community center where these children can come together, these young mothers or baby mothers can come together and have a sort of befriending service so that they share their own experiences. If I'm familiar with somebody in the same group with me this month, next month, 3 months, I should now be able to confide in at least one somebody. So these are some of the things we were thinking about. Many people didn't like the idea that we should set up a center. Oh, how do you pack a whole heap of girls who are damn no use to themselves and to anybody? They will become, she said, no. When they share experiences, what we hear from those experiences will make us to know what to put in place for these children. And that is how Chrysalis came into being.
I was approached by the Department of Health to be involved in a project which was about training in health and risk. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to reach for one of the books. So obviously the work that we did, working with people in Mossad, in Hume, on a day-to-day basis, informally, not necessarily formally, some of it was formal through my health promotion specialist role, led to publications such as this one, Healthcare in Multiracial Britain, which was one of the first books and of its kind, acknowledging the fact that healthcare wasn't a generic thing. You had to look at your populations. The other thing it led to, and this was directly as a result of working in Mossad. This book came very much out of discussions with local people, the Black Nurse and Endangered Species, because what was happening, you see, when people like myself and other Black nurses would challenge the system, would raise issues, we were seen as unpopular. But more importantly, our experience of being employees wasn't good. And people, even far back as the late 70s, nursing, which is a popular area for a lot of girls, women from the Caribbean, was becoming unpopular. They were looking for other avenues because the health sector wasn't valuing their skills. So, for example, when I raised issues about BME care, rather than welcoming them, it was seen as unpopular, like I mentioned. So as a result of that, people are thinking, well, perhaps we ought to look elsewhere. And I could see that. And that's why that was the title of this book, An Endangered Species, because people were beginning to vote with their feet out of the profession. So those are two publications, which I'm very proud of, but they came from here, from the communities here. They weren't something that, it wasn't something that came from me as an individual. It came from the people in Matcham, the people we talked to, the people we interviewed, and it became quite a seminal, those two publications I raised, seminal publications which are pioneering in the health sector.
In terms of the setting up of the Sickle Cell Thalassemia Centre, it was a major achievement. It was actually the first service to be mainstream funded within the NHS in the UK. It was the first service to be developed outside London. And at the time, we were not only focusing on what was actually delivered here in Manchester, but with the help of the then Director of Public Health, we also assisted and facilitated other areas to set up a service, such as Leeds and Nottingham and Sheffield. We had a lot of dedicated individuals. We used to work quite late at night. I think the focus, we all shared the same vision, and the focus was really around making sure we had a better quality of life for patients with sickle cell. Although initially the project was looking at sickle cell disease and improving the quality of care, we soon realized that thalassemia was also another inherited blood condition that affected our community, but also the Southeast Asian communities, and your Greeks, your Turks, Italians, Saudi Arabians. And so we decided to also provide a service for thalassemia too. Our community also suffer from thalassemia. We always talk about sickle cell, and also you can get a combination of sickle cell and thalassemia, which is still the disease. And it manifests itself just like sickle cell disease. So I actually managed to, with the help of the Director of Public Health and the then Matcham, again campaigning, we managed to secure funding to appoint a thalassemia worker who spoke the different languages like Urdu, Punjabi and so forth, to help the communication within those communities.
After sort of qualifying and practicing as a health visitor for many years, I was actually encouraged to do the community practice teachers course, where I would, once I got the appropriate qualifications, be able to have students who were in practice, and sort of show them the ropes, and then I would actually have to assess them as to whether they're fit to practice or not. And that came with many challenges, because sometimes they wouldn't agree with your decision. But the thing is that it was paramount to know that they are safe to practice. Funny enough, and it's sad for me to say this, but the black students that I had were more challenging. They really were more challenging, because they expected me to say, yes, you've passed, when they haven't achieved the standard, the required standard, and one just cannot do that, So I came across quite a lot of challenges when it came to some of our students. Yeah, I mean, some were very sort of appreciative of my support that was given, because sometimes they would sort of bring their written work, and I would say, I'm sorry, but really, you have to do a bit more research, and you have to back it up. And they would sort of look at me and think, what's going on here? But they would go away, take on my advice, and then they would, say, oh, thanks for that advice. The head of year said it was very well done. So, yeah.
It's up to us, which direction we want to take WAS. But WAS is ongoing, and I think it should become embedded in our activism.
If we can think of ways in which women can sustain themselves and use the skills that they have and what they enjoy to make a living, and that can fit in around their children and their home lives, how powerful would that be?
I think it's just for the next generation to take up the mantle and carry that forward and go a step further. Yes, I think it is possible. And we just all have to kind of work together in unity, and we will get there, we will achieve it. And they will achieve far more than any of us that's living now has achieved. And that's what I'd like to see happen.
We need to look at the younger generation of females and how we can get them involved in projects, because they're going to be the future leaders. They're going to be the ones that take over the mantle and continue the work and continue what our generation are doing.
I think it's a fantastic project that it's looking at gathering the experiences of women, and I love the name Women of the Soil, but I think it will be excellent for young people in our community, and not just young women, but everybody in the community, and multi-generational, to actually see and hear the experiences of people that the community's nurtured. You know, people that have come out of the soil of the community and who appreciate the experiences and the challenges that come from living within the community, the stereotypes that are placed on us, the challenges and pressures that we face, but seeing that in spite of those, you can still achieve.
Contributions and achievements have to be celebrated, and more people need to know about it, that black women are a force to be reckoned with. They might not all have been recognised in a way that they've got some big award, but we are still there working on the ground very, very hard.
I think for the Women's Soil Project, a way forward would be to actually be drawing in more women, and to also be getting other people's perceptions of women within the community, to be getting people to nominate and talk about, you know, people that they know and value, who maybe don't have much profile at all.
The work that you're doing is just amazing. The fact that you are highlighting these women who have worked so hard in the community all these years, you know, and most people probably don't know about them. So I think to continue exactly what you're doing, you know, to highlight all these women who've set the stage for us, you know, whose shoulders we can now stand on, because a lot of the things that women today, including myself, can do is as a result of what those women did, you know, the doors that they opened for us. So that is what I hope, you know, your project will continue to do, to continue to raise the profile of these historical women, just like Sojourner Truth, you know, and then in years to come, you know, our children, our grandchildren will know just exactly what these people did in our community, so that they can go to certain schools, they can get jobs, and, you know, without people closing doors in front of them.
I'm an ordinary girl. I'm a local girl. You know, some people sometimes will ask me questions like, oh, did you go to private school? Private school? No, I'm a local girl, born and brought up in my side. And if I can achieve by, you know, setting myself a goal or a dream, it's probably more a dream, so can they. And I think that's what, you know, Women of the Soil can do through the stories of women, whether they're past, present or future. Use those stories to inspire and educate other women to get up and go on and do something. So we're not was, we're here and now, and looking forward to the future.